Big Shaq's mother, Ajoa Mensa, was a kind and hard-working woman. She had moved to a new country many years ago, hoping for a better future for her family. Life was not easy, but she never complained. She worked long hours, cooking and cleaning for other people, just to make sure her children had food to eat and a roof over their heads. No matter how tired she was, she always had a smile for her son, telling him, "Hard work and kindness will take you far." One day, Ajoa started feeling unwell. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was just exhaustion from working too much. But as days passed, her condition got worse. She felt weak, had trouble breathing, and even simple tasks became difficult. Shaq noticed the change in his mother and grew worried. He begged her to see a doctor, but she hesitated. Money was tight, and visiting a doctor was expensive. She didn't want to be a burden on her son, who was still trying to build his own future. But Shaq wouldn't take no for an answer. He had seen his mother struggle and sacrifice so much for him. Now it was his turn to take care of her. He reassured her that everything would be fine and took her to a nearby clinic. It was a small place, but Shaq hoped they would get the help his mother needed. When they arrived, Ajoa sat in the waiting area, holding her chest and breathing heavily. Shaq went to the receptionist and explained his mother's condition. The receptionist nodded and told them to wait for the doctor. Minutes felt like hours as Ajoa's discomfort increased. Finally, a doctor walked in. He was a tall man with glasses and a cold expression. Shaq quickly stood up and explained what was wrong with his mother. The doctor looked at them for a moment, then sighed loudly. Instead of showing concern, he asked, "Do you have insurance?" His tone was sharp, and his eyes held no kindness. Shaq hesitated. He knew they didn't have insurance, but he was willing to pay whatever he could. "I'll pay," he said. "Just please help my mother." The doctor scoffed and shook his head. "We don't have time for people who can't afford proper care," he said, waving them away as if they were unimportant. He didn't ask about Ajoa's symptoms, didn't check her condition. He simply dismissed them. Shaq couldn't believe what he was hearing. His hands clenched into fists as he fought back the anger rising in his chest. His mother, the strongest woman he knew, sat there, humiliated and in pain, but she said nothing. She simply took his hand and whispered, "Let's go, my son." As they stepped out of the clinic, Shaq felt a deep pain in his heart. He had never felt so helpless before. But at that moment, he made a silent promise to himself. One day, he would make sure no one else had to go through this. Shaq walked beside his mother as they left the clinic, his heart heavy with anger and sadness. He couldn't understand how someone who had taken an oath to help people could be so unkind. His mother had always taught him to treat everyone with respect, no matter their background or situation. But today, she had been treated unfairly, just because they didn't have enough money. As they walked home, Shaq kept looking at his mother. She looked weaker than before, and every few steps, she stopped to catch her breath. He wanted to carry her, but she gently shook her head. "I am fine, my son," she said softly, but Shaq knew she was just trying to be strong. That night, he sat beside her bed, watching her sleep. Her breathing was uneven, and her face looked tired. He felt powerless. He wanted to help her, but he didn't know how. He didn't have money, and he wasn't a doctor. But deep inside, he knew one thing: he couldn't just sit and do nothing. The next day, Shaq visited different clinics, asking if they could help his mother. Some places told him they were too full, while others asked for money up front. Every door he knocked on was closed in his face. It felt like no one cared. After hours of searching, he finally found a small community clinic run by kind-hearted doctors. They agreed to check his mother and give her basic treatment for free. Shaq rushed home, full of hope. He gently woke his mother and helped her get ready. Even though she was weak, she smiled at him. "You are a good son," she whispered. At the clinic, the doctors treated her with care. They gave her medicine and advised her to rest. For the first time in days, Shaq felt a little relief. But deep down, he couldn't forget what had happened at the first clinic. He couldn't forget the rude doctor who had refused to help his mother just because she didn't have insurance. As his mother rested at home, Shaq sat outside, thinking. He remembered all the times his mother had struggled but never gave up. She had worked day and night to give him a better life. Now it was his turn to do something. He didn't want anyone else to feel the way he had felt that day, helpless, angry, and heartbroken. That moment changed something inside him. He made a promise to himself. One day, he would make sure that no one else was turned away from a clinic just because they were poor. He didn't know how he would do it, but he was determined. Shaq looked up at the sky and took a deep breath. He had a long journey ahead, but he was ready. He would work harder than ever before. He would find success, and when he did, he would use it to help others. This was just the beginning of his mission. Shaq woke up the next morning with a new sense of purpose. His mother was still resting, but he could see that the medicine had helped. Her breathing was a little better, and she didn't look as tired as before. This gave him some relief, but his mind was still restless. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the first clinic. The image of the doctor's cold face and his dismissive words played in his head over and over again. Shaq had always believed that if you worked hard, good things would come to you. His mother had taught him that. But now he realized that sometimes, no matter how hard you worked, life could still be unfair. He thought about all the people who might have faced the same situation as his mother, sick, desperate, and turned away just because they couldn't afford treatment. That day, Shaq sat with his mother and talked to her about his dreams. One day, I want to do something big, he said. I don't want anyone else to go through what we did. His mother smiled weakly and placed her hand on his. You have a big heart, my son. Whatever you do, do it with kindness. Her words stayed with him. He knew that if he wanted to make a real difference, he had to become successful first. He had to work harder than ever before. His mother had always believed in him, and now he had to prove that her sacrifices were not in vain. Shaq started looking for opportunities. He worked day and night, taking on different jobs, saving money, and learning as much as he could. Whenever he felt tired, he reminded himself of his promise. He reminded himself of the pain in his mother's eyes that day at the clinic. That memory gave him strength. As time passed, Shaq's dedication began to pay off. He started gaining recognition in his career, and soon, he was earning more money than he had ever imagined. But success did not change him. He still remembered where he came from. He still remembered the struggle. One evening, he sat down with his mother and shared his plans. I want to build something, he said. A place where people like us can go when they need help. A place where no one will be turned away. His mother's eyes filled with tears, this time not from pain, but from pride. You have always been a special child, she said, and I know you will do something great. Shaq knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. He had worked hard to get to this point, and now it was time to give back. This was no longer just a dream. It was a mission, and he would not stop until he made it a reality. Shaq had made up his mind. He was going to build something that would help people like his mother, people who had nowhere to go when they were sick and no money to pay for expensive treatments. But dreaming about it was one thing, making it happen was another. He knew this journey wouldn't be easy, but he was ready for the challenge. The first thing he did was start researching. He read about hospitals, clinics, and healthcare systems. He wanted to understand what it took to run a medical center. He also talked to doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers. He asked them questions, listened to their experiences, and took notes. The more he learned, the more determined he became. But Shaq knew that knowledge alone wasn't enough. He needed money, land, and the right people to help him turn his vision into reality. He had already worked hard to build a successful career, but he needed to do more. He took on extra projects, invested wisely, and saved every penny he could. At the same time, he started spreading the word about his idea. Some people supported him and admired his passion, but others doubted him. They told him that building a clinic was too big of a dream, that it would cost too much, and that he should focus on his own life instead. Shaq didn't let their words discourage him. He had seen his mother suffer, and he knew there were thousands of others like her. He couldn't just walk away. One day, while talking to a group of businessmen, Shaq shared his vision. "I want to build a clinic where people who don't have money can still get treated with respect," he said. "I don't want anyone to feel the way my mother felt that day." Some of them shook their heads, but one man, Mr. Johnson, leaned forward with interest. "That's a powerful dream," he said. "Tell me more." Shaq explained everything: his experience at the clinic, his mother's struggle, and his desire to create a place where kindness and care came before money. Mr. Johnson listened carefully, then smiled. "I like your passion," he said. "If you're serious about this, I can introduce you to some people who might be able to help." That meeting changed everything. Mr. Johnson connected Shaq with investors, architects, and medical professionals who believed in his idea. Step by step, the pieces started coming together. Shaq found a piece of land in a neighborhood where people needed healthcare the most. He hired experts to design the clinic and made sure it would have everything necessary to treat patients properly. He personally selected doctors and nurses who were not only skilled but also compassionate. The dream was no longer just a dream. It was becoming real. As he stood on the land where his clinic would soon be built, Shaq closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "This is for you, Mom," he whispered, "and for everyone else who needs it." As the days passed, Shaq's dream began to take shape. The land he had purchased was now being transformed into something that would change lives. Construction workers were busy building the clinic, and every time Shaq visited, he could see the walls going up, the windows being installed, and the foundations of something meaningful being set. It was a slow process, but each step forward made Shaq more excited and more determined. He knew that building the clinic was only part of the challenge. The real work would begin when it opened. The clinic had to be more than just a building. It had to offer real help and support for people who were often ignored or treated unfairly. Shaq thought about his mother every day as he worked on the clinic, remembering how she had been turned away just because she couldn't pay. He knew the clinic had to be different. It had to be a place of hope, not rejection. One of the first things he did was make sure that treatment would be affordable. He didn't want anyone to feel like they were being judged based on their financial situation. The clinic would offer low-cost care, with some services being completely free for those who couldn't afford anything. Shaq also made sure the clinic would be open to everyone, no matter where they came from or what language they spoke. But there was still a lot to do. Shaq continued working long hours, making sure that everything was on track. He also focused on building partnerships with local businesses and organizations that could support the clinic, whether through donations, volunteering, or helping with the clinic's resources. Slowly but surely, the support for his project grew. Despite all the positive changes, Shaq still faced moments of doubt. Some days, the weight of the responsibility felt heavy. Would the clinic be able to handle the number of patients who would need care? Would there be enough staff to treat everyone with the attention they deserved? And most importantly, would people trust the clinic after the way they had been treated by other doctors in the past? But every time Shaq felt doubt creeping in, he thought of his mother and the promise he had made. He thought of the way she had looked at him when he told her about his plans, her eyes full of pride and hope. He couldn't give up. As the opening day drew closer, Shaq began to plan a special event to welcome the community to the clinic. He wanted to make sure everyone knew that this place was for them, and that they would always be treated with kindness and respect. The event would include free health checkups, educational seminars, and entertainment for the children. It was a way to show people that they were valued and that their health mattered. The day before the clinic's grand opening, Shaq stood in front of the building, taking it all in. It had taken years of hard work, sacrifice, and determination, but it was finally ready. He looked at the sign that read, Shaq's Community Health Clinic, where everyone matters. It felt like a dream come true, but Shaq knew the real work was just beginning. He smiled, knowing that his mother's pain and his own struggles had led him to this moment. The clinic wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of hope and change, a place where no one would ever be turned away. Tomorrow would be the start of something new, something important, something that would last for generations to come. 4:00 the day of the grand opening arrived, and Shaq stood in front of the clinic, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. The building looked beautiful, with its clean white walls and bright windows. It was everything he had envisioned, a place of healing, a place of comfort. The doors were open, and the first visitors began to arrive. Shaq watched as families, elderly people, and young parents walked in, many of them looking uncertain but hopeful. He greeted each one personally, his heart swelling with pride. The atmosphere was filled with a sense of anticipation and joy. Volunteers from the local community handed out free water bottles and informational brochures about the services the clinic offered. Some of the clinic's doctors and nurses were on hand to answer questions, while others began to conduct basic health checkups for those who had been waiting. Children ran around excitedly, their laughter filling the air as they were treated to face painting and games. For Shaq, every little detail felt like a victory. This clinic wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a place where people could get the care they needed without fear of being judged or turned away. It was a place where kindness and respect were at the heart of everything. As the morning passed, people began to line up for the free health screenings, and Shaq's heart soared. He knew that this was exactly what the community needed. But there was one person Shaq was especially eager to see. The same doctor who had turned away his mother that fateful day. The one who had refused her treatment hadn't crossed Shaq's mind for a long time. But today, as he was greeting patients, he noticed the doctor walking toward the clinic. His heart skipped a beat. The doctor, who had once been so cold and dismissive, now looked out of place in the bright, welcoming space. He seemed unsure, almost nervous. Shaq took a deep breath. This was his moment. This was the moment he could show the world that kindness had the power to heal, even when others chose to be cruel. Shaq approached him with a calm smile, remembering his mother's advice to always be kind. "Dr. Williams," Shaq said, extending his hand, "I'm glad to see you here today." The doctor looked surprised, his eyes widening. "I didn't expect to find you here," he said, his voice quiet. He seemed a bit taken aback by the warmth in Shaq's tone. Shaq didn't respond with anger or bitterness. He had no interest in holding a grudge. Instead, he simply said, "This is a place where everyone is treated with care and respect, no matter who they are or where they come from. I hope you find it inspiring." The doctor hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I can see that," he replied, almost to himself. Shaq didn't press the matter any further. He knew that the doctor's actions had spoken for themselves, and there was no need to hold on to anger. Instead, he turned to welcome more guests and continued with the event. As the day went on, Shaq's heart was full. The clinic was busy, but it was also calm. People were being treated, and there was no rush, no pressure. The medical staff took their time with each patient, making sure everyone felt heard and understood. It wasn't perfect. It was just the beginning. But it was exactly what Shaq had wanted, a place where people could come for help without fear of being turned away or mistreated. That evening, as the last visitors left and the clinic started to quiet down, Shaq stood outside once more. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light on the building. His mother had called earlier in the day, telling him how proud she was. Shaq smiled, knowing that this was only the start. He had promised to make a difference, and today he had kept that promise. Months passed, and Shaq's clinic grew from a small community project into a lifeline for so many people. The word spread quickly, and soon more and more families were visiting for the affordable, compassionate care they received. The clinic was no longer just a building. It had become a symbol of hope for those who had been ignored by the healthcare system. Shaq's commitment to making sure no one was turned away, no matter their background, was paying off. The doctors, nurses, and staff all worked tirelessly, not for money, but because they believed in the mission. They took extra time with each patient, explaining their treatment options, offering advice, and listening with genuine care. It was a place where everyone felt valued. But even as the clinic flourished, Shaq knew that the journey wasn't over. He had always promised to help as many people as he could. And now he was determined to keep expanding, making sure that no one had to go without care. He began to look at other areas in the city that lacked medical services, hoping to open additional clinics that could provide the same level of care. One afternoon, while reviewing the clinic's progress, Shaq received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was familiar, but he hadn't heard it in a while. It was Dr. Williams, the same doctor who had once refused to treat his mother. Shaq's mind raced for a moment, but he stayed calm. "Hello, Dr. Williams," he said politely, though his heart was beating a little faster. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation that day at your clinic," the doctor said. "And I have to admit, I was wrong. I didn't understand what you were trying to do, but seeing what you've built, well, it's incredible. I'd like to apologize for my actions." Shaq was silent for a moment, surprised by the doctor's words. Part of him had expected the apology, but another part of him had never really thought it would come. "I appreciate that, Dr. Williams," Shaq replied. "But there's no need for apologies. I understand that people sometimes act out of fear or misunderstanding. What matters is what we do moving forward." The doctor paused, as if considering Shaq's words. "You're right," he said. "I wanted to ask if you would consider letting me volunteer at your clinic. I've seen firsthand how important your work is, and I want to be a part of it. I may not have understood it back then, but now I do." Shaq felt a surge of something he hadn't expected: hope. It wasn't about holding grudges or getting revenge. It was about change, about the ability to move forward and create something better. "I'd be happy to have you on board," Shaq said, his voice steady. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Dr. Williams. And if you truly want to make a difference, you'll have the opportunity here." From that day on, Dr. Williams began volunteering at the clinic. It wasn't easy for him at first. He had to unlearn old habits and find a new way of connecting with patients. But slowly, he changed. He began to treat everyone with the same respect and care that Shaq had shown him. He saw the impact of kindness and learned just how much it meant to patients when they felt valued. Shaq watched as the doctor grew into a new version of himself. It wasn't about punishment, it was about understanding and growth. Over time, Dr. Williams became one of the clinic's most dedicated staff members, and Shaq was proud of the transformation. It was a reminder that change was always possible, and sometimes all it took was a little bit of compassion. As the months passed, Shaq's clinic became more than just a place for medical care. It became a beacon of change. It showed people that no matter where they came from or what their circumstances were, they had the right to be treated with dignity. And Shaq knew, deep in his heart, that this was just the beginning of a much bigger journey. Years passed, and Shaq's clinic continued to grow, becoming a cornerstone of the community. What had started as a simple vision to help those in need had turned into a network of healthcare centers across the city. Shaq had worked tirelessly to expand his services, making sure that more people had access to the care they deserved, regardless of their financial situation. He knew that the journey wasn't over, but every milestone brought him closer to his goal of building a world where everyone had equal access to healthcare. One of the things Shaq was most proud of was how the clinic had become a place of unity. People from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and different parts of the city came together, knowing that they would receive the same level of care, kindness, and respect. The clinic wasn't just a medical facility. It was a place of community where people could connect with others, share their stories, and support one another. As the years went on, Shaq's influence spread beyond the clinic. He started speaking at community events, sharing his story, and encouraging others to pursue their own dreams of making a difference. He spoke about the importance of compassion in healthcare and how even small acts of kindness could change someone's life. His message resonated with many, and soon other cities reached out, asking how they could replicate his model of affordable, compassionate care. One day, Shaq received an invitation to speak at a national healthcare conference. It was a huge honor, and he felt both excited and humbled. As he stood in front of the large audience, he could see the faces of doctors, nurses, and community leaders, all eager to learn from his experience. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "I'm here today because I believe that healthcare should be a right, not a privilege," Shaq said, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "I know what it feels like to be turned away when you're in need. My mother taught me that kindness and compassion are the most powerful tools we have. That's why, when I started this journey, I promised to build a place where everyone, no matter their background, would be treated with respect. We need to make sure that healthcare is accessible to all, no matter who they are or where they come from." The room was silent as Shaq's words echoed in the hall. He spoke from the heart, sharing his own experiences and the lessons he had learned along the way. He spoke about the importance of empathy in medicine and how healthcare professionals had the power to heal not just bodies, but hearts as well. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Shaq smiled, knowing that his journey had come full circle. What had started with a small clinic had now become a movement. His message was spreading, and more people were beginning to understand that kindness and care should always come first. As Shaq looked back on everything he had achieved, he couldn't help but think of his mother. She had always believed in him, and now he was living her dream, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever struggled to get the care they needed. In the end, Shaq realized that his success wasn't measured by the size of his clinics or the number of people he helped. It was measured by the difference he had made in people's lives. He had proven that one person, driven by compassion, could change the world. And as he stood on the stage, looking out at the audience, he knew that his journey was far from over. There was still much more work to be done, but he was ready for whatever came next. Shaq had built more than just a clinic. He had built a legacy.